So what I do is I record the session and I put it on my YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to use it, they want to watch it again, feel free. It's in the public domain. So there's no sort of limits on that. Today we've got Stuart Elliott, and he's come along and he's going to be talking to us about values, personal values, values that guide us in our lives and how we behave and the actions we take and the choices that we make. And so not just in business, but also in life. And if you can actually balance work and life, that's what it's all about, because at the end of the day, it's just one journey. There are no two separate journeys, just one journey that maybe we spend a lot of our time during the young age working, and then, I don't know, and later on we try and find the balance when we stop working. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about values and why are values important in the decisions that we make. And so Stuart is going to give us some insights into this. So welcome, Stuart.
Thank you very much. And it's good to be here and have this opportunity to have an interesting discussion. Before we get started on values itself, I'd like to just broach an interesting thing about language. And for me, language is a smorgasbord of experiences and energy. And when we delve into it a little deeper, we find that words are just labels. And the labels that we attach meaning to, we attach energy to through our experiences. So a common label that we all know is a chair. And you know, if we talk about a chair, it's just an object with four legs and a back and maybe some armrests. But we each have our own visual interpretation of that word because of our experiences, because of where we are. And the same applies to every word. So when we talk about values or integrity or whatever, we have to understand that everybody has got their own internal interpretation, shall we say, or representation of that word in itself. And really the word is just an invitation to have a conversation. It's a, shall we say, a common or a shared experience, but it's not a definitive experience. So if we say values, each of us will probably have a slightly different interpretation of what that word is and what it means to them. And this is where we can trip up very often in conversations, because we assume in a conversation that the other person understands exactly what we're saying. They're on the same page, they've got the same picture, everything else. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. You know, I had a conversation with a lady and we were talking about benign attention. And for me, that message was about, you know, just sitting back, letting it be. But unfortunately, she had a job in a well, I say unfortunately, her job was in a terminal cancer facility. And unfortunately, she'd loaded the word benign with all the pain and suffering she sees every day through cancer. So she couldn't get on board with my interpretation, and we were having a miscommunication because of that. And this is one of the challenges with language. I actually went into a thesaurus and gave her a few synonyms, and then she became, great, fantastic, I understand, everything was working then, because now we're on the same page. So it's our responsibility when we're having these communications to make sure that the person you're talking to actually is on the same page as you, that you're talking their language. So if we take values, because that's the topic for today, I might have my interpretation and you may have yours, and they may be different, they may be the same. It doesn't matter, but we've got to understand what that word means to the person we're having the conversation with. And obviously with values, common things are honesty, integrity, a code to live by, types of things. Those are types of translations of the word, shall we say. But what does actually integrity mean to you, David, to you, Joseph, to you, Uni, Maitre, Paul, Philip, and Gary, and myself, Stuart? What does it mean to us as individuals? So we have to be, you know, aware of this potential pitfall when we're having the conversations. And we can have shared meanings, obviously, but they can be much deeper. They could be surface level, but much deeper, the real meaning. So it's an interesting facet just to keep in mind as we have this conversation, and also keep in mind when you're having conversations with everybody. Our duty, I would suggest, as a message giver, is to make sure that we're giving that message to whoever we're talking to in a way that they can understand it, not in a way that we presume they can understand it, but in a way that they actually can.
So let me ask you a question, Stuart. So do values, I mean, do your values change? We talk about values in business and values in life. Are there sort of different realms here? Are just values across the board?
I would suggest that there are certain values people take as standard, but we can tweak those as we go along. I mean, for instance, honesty is a value that many people would say is standard, but individuals can tweak honesty. They can be honest in one way, but maybe not so honest in another way. And I think that is something that is I hesitate to use the word ability, but it is an ability, humans. And it's something that we may do to suit our situation at that given time. I mean, for instance, I've got two young children. One is 6 and the other's just about 4.5. And if I talk about honesty and being honest, if there's a threatening situation that's going to affect them, then I may tweak that value to suit that situation so I can protect them. I may not be 100% honest, whereas I could have been beforehand, because I'm seeing a threat. So I'm adapting that value to that threat.
That's an interesting point. So we're talking about an interpretation of a value.
Yeah, again, a value is a label. So we've always got that interpretation of that label and what it means. But for the sake of convenience, if we say honesty, we generally agree on a common definition. The same with integrity. So it's an interesting thought to play with and to think about, and again, it depends on where you are in your personal circumstances and how you see it and how actually you have that relationship you have with yourself. And I'll give you true story.
Another question, Stuart. Another
Okay.
question. Can values be changed? Can you change someone's values? Like, I don't know, in my business, say, for example, I have someone in my team or in the office or that has different values to me, and I want to get them on board. I want to get them in my team, and I want them to sort of, work like me and see our future projects and so on. But this person is seeing things in a different way, different values. Can I get them to change? Can I get them to come towards me, or is it just
I would suggest that you can, but you can't make them change. You can invite them to change through your leadership skills and through your understanding. And if they see a value, should we say, in that, becoming like you or in following your footsteps, then they will change to suit, because we all look for role models in our life. And, at a young age, our biggest role models are our parents or our teacher. Now, quite often, the values that the parents instill, if we've got, shall we say, and I don't want to use the word bad, but a parent who's not so honest or something like that, they may instill those values in you. But when you move on and you become wiser, you can say to yourself, okay, well, that was the best my father, should we say, could do at the time, because that's the type of person he was. But I don't want to be like that. I want to look at honesty in a different way. So there is, a lot of flexibility, and it depends who your role model or your mentor is.
I was just
And it
reflecting
depends
on
where
this.
you are in your own personal journey.
I was just reflecting on what you were saying there, as you were saying that. It's true what our parents instill in us, their values. And one of the values I was brought up on was work hard.
Mm-hmm.
Work hard, not work smart. Like, nowadays we're talking about work
Yep.
smart, not work hard. And so I grew up working hard. Working hard meant actually putting in the hours and sweating and really coming home exhausted and saying, you've had a good day, you've done a good day's work. So
Yep.
if I came home and I wasn't so exhausted, I'd be looking for other things to do because I hadn't fulfilled my role of working hard. So now
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about working smart. So again, that was just something that was instilled in me at a young age. You've got to work hard to get to go places.
Yeah, and along those lines, a very common refrain is money doesn't grow on trees. Money is scarce. It's hard to get money. And we take that with us, and that becomes a value and an understanding. And that's what we create because that's what we focus on.
Hmm.
Or money is the root of all evil. Money is bad, or this, or whatever it is that's instilled in us. But as we grow and get wiser, we meet different mentors. We may say, okay, well, that was good for them in their time or whatever, but it's not where I want to be now. So we have that ability to change.
And so what steps can we take to take
Well,
this?
it depends who we meet, and it depends where we are on our life journey. For instance, back in '86, I was traveling through Africa overland, and we got to Kenya, and we were in an area where the Maasai tribes live, near the Masai Mara. And we were sat at the campfire one night and toasting our feet and our toes around the fire. And it was dark, pitch black. You could only see the glow of the fire. And suddenly 3 Maasai warriors arrived out of nowhere. They just materialized, just like ghosts just coming in. And I saw this as an opportunity for me to fulfill a personal desire because they had spears with them and I wanted a spear. And I'd come to Africa, some people had advised me to bring trade barter goods. And I had at that time because it was '86 and they were all the rage, a scientific calculator. And I thought to myself, this is my opportunity. This is it. I'm going to get a spear. So I rushed to the tent and I grabbed the calculator and I showed it to one of the warriors. And he was a young guy, 25 or something like that. And he looked at it, took it out of the box and he played with it. And I said, it's wonderful, he said. And then he carefully put it back in the box and said, but what use is it to me? Here's me wanting his spear, which he needs to protect himself and his cattle and everything else. And I've got this wonderful scientific calculator, which what's he going to do with it if a lion comes? Throw it at the lion? But not only that, I hadn't even considered, where's he going to get batteries from? We're in the middle of the bush. We're in the middle of the bundoos. There's no shops anywhere near. Where's he going to get batteries from? So I had my own sort of very limited view. And in reality, I was probably looking down at him, etc., etc. But he taught me a beautiful lesson because he was so honorable about it. And it made me actually want to just disappear and hide in the ground. I actually shut up after that. And it was make sure that what you have, either in the way of a business goods or something you're selling, or in yourself, make sure that has value to the other person. And I didn't.
Yeah, I think a good point, we can come back to this later on, is perspective on your values. We'll come back to that one, Stuart. Alessandra's got a question. Alessandra, you got a question for Stuart?
Yeah. Hello, Stuart, and everybody else. That's very interesting what you've been saying so far. And I would just wanted to ask you this. There's a connection, of course, between values and purpose, right? Purpose in life, purpose in business. And I was wondering, is it, your value system that actually creates your purpose, or is it the other way around? Or does it work both ways?
It's an interesting point. And I would suggest that the purpose maybe comes first, but it can work both ways. I mean, if you've got somebody his purpose is just to become rich, and that's it, that's all his purpose is, then quite likely he could become that nasty to other people and not care about the other people just as long as he gets the money. And you see that in salespeople, you know, especially in the UK back in the 70s, 80s with with the double glazing and second-hand car salespeople. They see the person as a bank. They just want their money. They don't see the person. They don't even try and sell them anything of value. They just want that money. So that you know, in that respect, there is that purpose that's driving the person, and the values fall out of the window, or they're tweaked to suit that purpose.
Mhm.
But if you have a value and a level, so we say, of integrity about caring for fellow human beings, you'll have a different purpose possibly, and a different way of expressing that purpose.
Okay, thanks.
Does that
Yeah,
make
sure,
sense?
sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going back to perspective. We're talking about values as a unique perspective on meaning, purpose, direction. So are we do, or each one of us has a unique perspective of their values?
I would go further than that, say some people don't even consider their values because they're too self-absorbed.
Give us an example. Sure.
Well, if you are totally ego-driven and you're just so fond of yourself and you think you're the best thing since sliced bread, do you really have any consideration for others? Do you have any values you live by in that respect?
Very true.
You could even think that you're setting an example for others to follow you.
Well, you are, but maybe not in the way you think you are.
It could be you're so success driven that you are saying that in some way through your success other people will follow you or see.
Well, you know, we all generally as a human race look towards a leader because we are a herd creature. So we will, you know, some people will gravitate towards this type of leader, others will gravitate to that type of leader, some will see through the BS that is created, and people will, you know, will move where they want to.
True.
But, you know, for individuals, some people don't even consider values, or they distort them to the fact that maybe it's money or power or whatever. And again, if you look at many politicians, what is their value, belief system or whatever? It's about power, it's about control, it's about being that kingpin.
Yep.
It's not necessarily about being good for the planet or the universe or the people they're supposed to be serving or representing. It's about their own personal ego, should we say.
So when we talk about values, Stuart, are we talking about also ethics, the way we ethically we do things, or is it completely different? So we talk values, ethics.
Well, you know, in some interpretations of the word, if you look in the dictionary and look for synonyms, ethics comes into as a synonym of it. But again, ethics can be twisted and distorted. We're wonderful at finding ways to justify our belief system, whatever it is. And that is one of the challenges with words and language. Without having considered conversations and really standing in the other person's shoes, it's very difficult to understand what they're doing and what they're saying and what they're meaning sometimes. I mean, back in 2012, I had a NLP course, and one of the trainers was John Grinder, who's one of the co-founders of what we call NLP. And I've never met a person who considers each individual word, not only of the question, but in his answer for a very long time before he answers, because he's a precisionist in linguistics, and he understands how all the words can get twisted and the meaning may not come across. And it was a beautiful example of that. And I've never met anybody who has that ability. I mean, I'm not saying he's the only person, but I've never actually personally met anybody who has that real ability and the genuine desire to have an honest communication without accidental pitfalls.
So what are the pitfalls if values are not aligned in an organization?
Well, one big pitfall that goes hand in hand with values is judgment.
Judgment?
Yeah. Someone doesn't believe the same as us, doesn't have the same values of us, they are lesser people. You've seen that with the British Empire, where the British have gone to different countries around the world and looked down on the native populations because they have different beliefs, they have different values, and they're not the same as us. So they're not as high up the ladder as us. They're inferior.
So if they're inferior, what does that mean?
Well, in some cases, they're subhuman. I mean, in the southern African region of Botswana, the Bushmen, who were one of the indigenous people, were classified as vermin by the British and legally able to be hunted by anybody, just like rats and mice.
Because they had different beliefs and different values.
Different beliefs and different values. I mean, they were looked on, and they were a nomadic tribe. They don't have permanent structures. There's something wrong with them. They don't have a permanent structure. We didn't bother to understand their world and how they existed and cohabited in the world that they lived in. But because our values were at a certain point and we weren't prepared because we were judging, we weren't prepared to consider their values, judgment played the big role, and we looked down on them and ostracized them or whatever. I'll give you another example of how values can distort relationships and cause conflict. There's a wonderful story by a master hypnotherapist who unfortunately passed away in '83, but his name was Milton H. Erickson. And he had a client who lived at home with her family as a woman, and she had this beautiful shag power rug in the living room, and she spent hours getting this rug perfect. And then the kids would run in, the father would walk on it, and there'd be footprints everywhere, and she'd lose it. And she hated them coming in, so much so that they avoided her. And what was happening was she was separating the family because of her value, that this rug has to be this way, and this was my belief that it's so beautiful and everything else. So he, through conversations with her, he reframed the footprints from being a disaster to a sign of a loving family being present in her life. Now, if you take that message that someone doesn't share your values, there's a conflict, and we can create conflicts from it. You can see that in many, many cases in organizations. You see it with a leader who's more, maybe should we say, dictatorial, who wants yes men. So they just say yes just to keep him happy so they can help move up the ladder. But he's not really a leader in a leader's term, because he's not growing, he's not sharing. He's making people react out of fear.
Correct.
And whatever values they say that they have, it's not maybe true in their heart.
Yeah, it's very, when you ask someone, who are you? That sort of $100,000 question, that seems very easy. Who are you, Gary? No. And so let's go a bit deeper into that. I mean, it's very difficult to look at say, who are you? Well, I'm an honest person. I keep my word, and I'm punctual, and I respect people, and you say all the good things about yourself.
Yeah.
You want the other people to say the bad things about you. Is that right?
No, you don't. You don't want to hear the bad things.
Oh, you don't want to hear the bad things, obviously.
Or if they do, you'll find a way to excuse them. And when you say honest, I mean, you can be honest, but you can be dishonest at the same time by being honest.
So basically, we all have the same values.
Well, To a certain extent, I mean, but how we interpret those individual values is where the challenge is. I mean, if we say honesty, what does it really mean?
I would put honest, respect. I would connect that word honest to respect.
Okay.
Meaning that I will treat you in the right way.
Okay. So if I have a gun and I point it at you, you show me a level of respect out of fear.
But I could show you that respect even without the gun.
If I asked for it in that way, if I knew how to ask for it, or if my behavior invited it. But
Exactly.
not everybody has that ability.
No,
They don't have that respect for themselves.
You say a gun, but it could be an aggression. It could be
Yeah.
a hard word in a meeting.
Yeah.
Doesn't have a harsh word.
I mean, you've heard the expression, you know, I had to sign this document. He had a gun to my head. It's a metaphor, but it's exactly what you're saying. It's done out of fear. It's not done out of genuine respect.
No.
You pretend to respect the person because that's what your job's all about, and you need the money.
Again, we talk about the word, the interpretation of words and so on. I don't know if that's if that would be respect. If I were to be put into that situation.
Well, I mean, just for instance, if we go back to children, they're often taught to respect their teacher, respect this person. But does that person invite respect, or is that something that's imposed upon them because of a hierarchical position? And then you've got the looser meaning or interpretation of the word respect that comes into play.
Yeah, respect for a role. I suppose we have respect for authority, for a policeman, or for a doctor.
We don't see the person in that situation, do we? We just see that role.
So is that a value that we all have?
Well, I think we're taught to respect certain hierarchical things like policemen, like doctors, etc., etc. But when we get wiser, maybe we can make distinctions and start seeing more about the individual behind the actual thing, and then questioning whether they demand the blind respect or we have to respect that because it's a law.
So how does that work in? I always try and come back into into the work context, because it's BEwell, business and entrepreneur. So I try to bring it into the work context. Because, I work with, like, there must be about 20 people working together in my business, and so very often we talk about respect. I mean, I respect you, but you, what are there different levels of respect? What I consider respectful and what you consider respectful are completely different.
Yeah, and when I was working in a company in South Africa, I was working as a factory support technician, and I was given about 6 projects to get done all together. And then the factory leader had a meeting with the team, and he wasn't happy because nothing was getting done. And he called me into the meeting, and he said, "When can I have these projects?" And the way he treated me triggered me. And I says, "Well, you tell me which project is the most important, and I'll give you a date. You've given me 6 things to do simultaneous, and you keep chopping and changing. How can I tell you what's going to happen if you can't make up your own mind?" And his position was that he was relying on his authority to command that respect, but he wasn't showing respect to the staff or anybody else. And he had a lot of people on the team underneath him who were yes men. So they would just go, yeah, boy, yeah, boy, yeah, boy, yes, boss. But they weren't showing real respect. And unfortunately, I was a little bit more challenging at that time. So I came up with an honest answer. I wasn't so diplomatic.
Yeah.
And what happened was, I think he lost a lot of faith in that situation, but he gave me one project and I gave him a date and I was left to go on and do it. And he didn't bother me again. So, you know, that is just one example of how that works in business. And you see it all the time.
We've got Joseph. Joseph's got his hand up. He's got a question for you, Stuart. Joseph?
Okay.
Well, it's an observation really more than anything. And it's about the dichotomy. That's what we perceive as our value and how others may perceive us. And I was reminded of the idea of the mafiosi, where they refer to themselves as men of honor.
Mm-hmm.
And honor for them meant one thing, but honor to their victims meant something entirely different. But as far as they were concerned, they were being congruent. They were living in congruence with their values. So it again goes back to Stuart's idea of the words being variable and our interpretation and our perspective on what meaning the words have, and then how we live them.
Yeah, and where is that honor directed? Is it honor directed to yourself and your values, or to the external world?
That was a big question.
It is, isn't it?
Or to the family. To the family.
Yeah. So it's, you know, I personally think there's no clear-cut answer, but we can have some common ground, obviously. I mean, if you think of a business relationship, I'm providing something to you as an individual or as a company. I need to make sure that what I'm providing has value to you in the way that you recognize the word value. And, you know, there's a wonderful example of a salesperson that I read a few years ago, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was rated as one of the #1 salesmen in the States. And I think it was in the 40s or 60s or 50s or something like that. But basically, he was a life insurance salesman. And he went to the client's house with a briefcase full of money, about $1 million in cash. And he had 2 armed guards with him. So obviously this is set in a frame as he walks in. And then he's talking to the people about what they're looking for. And then he'd reach into the case and bring out this bundle of cash and put it on the table and say, this is the education for your children. And then he'd take out some more money a little bit later and say, this is your retirement. So he was connecting to what their real values were. It wasn't the money. It was providing for their children, providing a stable retirement income. But it wasn't about the money I'm going to get from the policy. And that's one of the reasons he was the most successful salesperson at that time of life insurance. And another example of how values can lead us astray is another salesperson, again in the States, but he was a salesperson for high-end cookware, pots and pans and stuff like this. And one of his calls was at a farmhouse. And he walked in and the farmhouse isn't finished. The walls not painted, I don't think they even had electricity in the kitchen or something like that. And the gentleman and his wife were sat there and he was going through the motions because he'd already made a judgment that they didn't need this. They needed to spend the money on the house and get the house fixed up to suit his value system, not their value system, his value system. So he'd made this judgment. And then he didn't try and close the sale or anything else. And when he walked out, the husband accompanied him and laid into him. He was furious. He said, "How dare you judge me? How dare you decide what I buy for my wife? If my wife wants this crockery and this cooking ware, then I'm going to buy it for her." And we have these unconscious triggers. I mean, he'd obviously made that decision that the guys can't afford it. He's wasting his time because he was looking at things from his own value system. But that husband had a whole different interpretation of value, and it was about, providing for and satisfying his wife in the way that she needed it at that time.
So how can we understand people's values, Stuart? I'm just trying to think
By
like,
having
without being
open conversation.
without
Yeah,
judging.
but by having open conversations and being aware of the propensity for us to judge. Religion is a really good example of how judgment comes in, because we've got these values. We see a different religious sect or group or whatever, and they have different values, so we judge them. And when I was in South Africa, I was invited to go to a, should we say, a progressive Afrikaans church. And I can't speak Afrikaans very well. I've got the basic, hello, goodbye type of thing, but I can't speak it. But I was invited to go there as part of the sermon. And what I had to do was shoot an arrow into a target when I was given the command. And I sat there and had my bow underneath the seats and everything else. And they were talking in Afrikaans. And when it was my cue, nobody knew why I was there, what I was doing there. I came up and I had to shoot the arrow. And because of all the nerves I put on myself and the pressure I put on myself, I actually didn't get the bull. But the guy was talking about goals and targets and values and said how you can adapt and everything else. But the thing is, they did not try to push their values, their beliefs onto me. They accepted me for who I was. And I felt so welcome there. So if we step outside our ego and that need to convince everyone that it's right for us, that what's right for us is right for them, then we can start exploring, because we're coming from a place of openness. And then we can ask, okay, well, these are my values. This is what I believe in. What is it you believe in as an individual? And how are they similar and how are they different? But we're having an open conversation. We're not trying to persuade. And once we know that, then from a business point of view, it's much easier, because we've got a relationship, and it's much easier to match our offering to what their belief and their values are and their need is.
So what are the obstructions to this? What are our fears? Why don't we do this?
Ego comes in, judgment comes in, our belief that we're superior, all these types of things come into it. And at the end of the day, do we really want to have that conversation? Can we go out of ourselves enough to take the time to have that real conversation and discover what it is that other people want? Because where are we in our journey?
So if you were to discover what the other people want, would mean you'd have to change your beliefs and your...
No, I would suggest that you just accept it. And then if you're honest and your value is honesty and you're really true to that value, if you discover then that what you're offering doesn't match their needs, but what Joseph has got, or Philip has got, or someone else has got matches their needs, then you will recommend those people to them, because that's coming from a place of honesty and integrity. That's why I say we can say we're honest, but we're not 100% honest, because something else is taking over.
Very interesting. I just open up. I just wanted to ask, what woman?
It's interesting because we're interesting as people.
No, but I think what you're saying is complete the truth. It's like I've been to restaurants where the restaurant's full, and I've said to them, could you recommend another restaurant? And they say, no, we can't. Or no, there's no restaurant near around here. And I would think, well, there must be a restaurant around here, but they won't. Why is that? And you think, well, just they don't want to help the competitors. They don't want to help the customer, because I could be a customer for them in the future.
Yeah. But it's more likely that if they say, okay, yeah, there's a great restaurant around the corner, you're more likely to treat this first restaurant with, okay, I've got to go back there because they've been honest to me. You've got respect for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to open my, take the pin away, 1 minute. We're coming to like 10, 40, and we've got a lot of people here. Are there anyone wants to have a conversation with Stuart, ask some questions, because I've asked Stuart some questions regarding values and core values and personal values, and questions like, who are you, who are we? Very simple question. So do you have anyone wants is open a question to Stuart? Philip, do you have a question about who you are?
If I have a question about who I am, I don't know. A lot of what Stuart has said has really resonated with me. I'm a teacher by profession, but also I'm in a relationship with a person that is from another cultural background. And I'm Swedish, he's Italian. And so when we communicate in English. So a third language, so to speak. And it is interesting how we've had discussions where we thought we were talking about two different things, but we're actually talking about the same thing. That can even lead to like arguments that are quite heavy. And then in the end, you're like, what were we arguing about? Because we had the same idea, just because of words, like you were saying before, Stuart. So that's really interesting. I was thinking as well, you said something interesting. You said that you can't make someone change their values. You can only invite them to do so. Do you think there's a critical point in business, for example, or in your work team, where values become so much of an obstacle that you have to separate, that you have to either find another team, or if you have to fire someone? What do you think, Stuart?
Yeah, I think it's very possible, and sometimes people will resign for no apparent reason because their values have been threatened. They can't follow along with what's going on. And going back to the point about the changing people's values, changing people's beliefs. In the Korean War, a lot of the American prisoners who were captured and taken to China were treated with brainwashing techniques, etc., etc., and then eventually sent back to America to spread the word of the good of the North Korea, etc., etc. But without the continual reinforcement and the continual brainwashing, they soon reverted back because they hadn't made the change themselves. It had been forced upon them.
Yeah, I think
so it's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point.
Yeah, it's like when you make a decision to do something, the effect lasts longer because you made the decision.
Yeah, and that's true in coaching. You don't tell the people what to do. You give them stories, you give them advice, you point them in directions, you have questions which open them up and opens up their thinking, but they ultimately make the decision. If you try and tell them, they may go away for a second or a day or a week or whatever, but they will never make that lasting change because it's not come from inside themselves.
Yeah. So looking at values that you bring to the company or to your business and the values that attract clients, how does that work? How can we get clients? Like now we're talking about companies that have values that clients are looking for those values in companies. Have you had any experience on that?
Well, I think honesty, obviously, and total honesty is a big thing, but honesty in a way which is not threatening. And if you have a product and it's not 100% finished, or not 100% doing what it's supposed to do, would you be wise to be totally honest about that and refer them to a competitor? Would they actually come back to you? Or would you be better off looking at a way of finding a way to get your company to finish that product?
So how
or would you just try and sell it as it is and pretend?
Let me give you an example now, an actual case history, let's say, what's happening in my business, where how we work, how I work, the values that I have and the values that I try to to give to the team and the way we work is we have suppliers, we have teachers, we pay everyone on time, we respect them, they give them training, we listen to them and so on. We have a customer, one of our main customers, yeah, is just not in line with our values at the moment, but it's our main customer. So we can't talk to them because we can't find the person who we're supposed to speak to. We're not being paid on time, but it's our main customer. So we're finding it very tough in this period because our values are not matching. They used to match in the past. They were sold to another company, and now. So how does that work? Because values.
How much energy are you investing in that non-aligned customer? And would that energy be better used looking for customers elsewhere and then eventually letting this person go? If they're not paying on time, that's a good possibility that you wouldn't lose anything by losing the customer. But you would free up a lot of energy and a drain on your resources as a company and as an individual.
Yes.
I'm just, it's not so, it's your main.
It's never that easy. It's never that easy.
It's not so easy when it's your main customer, Stuart, and you've got 80% of your turnover, your revenues coming from there. It's not so easy to find another customer to take over that amount of revenue coming in. And
there becomes a challenge. Do you need to have one big customer, or is it better to have a lot of, a number of smaller customers supporting them that cover your expenses? Because it's easier to replace one of those than it is a big person. But again, if this big customer is 80% of your revenue and he's not paying on time, he's got you under his control, that customer, hasn't he? And at his whim, he can shut you off.
So values are different.
Yeah, it's obvious the value set of that company has changed. I mean, you said they used to pay on time, they used to support everything else, but they've changed. Maybe they've got new management, maybe they've got other issues. But it is a big challenge, and it is a danger if you rely on one person for your income, for the majority of your income. That should really be the icing on the cake, if you like.
Well, it definitely, the values are conflicting in this period, and so we're finding it very difficult to maintain our values, i.e. pay the suppliers, pay the teachers, pay everyone on time, and work with customers who have got different values, who are not paying us on time because their values are different now. And so,
yeah, so is it the stage to stack the customer? And it's easy to talk about it, but at some stage, that decision may be made for you, or you will just get so fed up and say, go take yourself elsewhere. Give it to me. Give it to Stuart, because I don't care about him. He can be dragged under, but you're not dragging me down.
Can your values be compromised for a short period of time, where you change your values to adapt to a situation and then go back to them later on?
Well, you can always tweak your values, can't you? But I mean, it depends whether it's a core value or a surface level value. And the danger is if you adapt to a lesser value, shall we say, for a situation, the danger is that the second time it's easier. The third time it's even easier, and the fourth time maybe it sticks forever, because you've made that compromise too many times.
Good point.
And if you compromise your values, how does that affect your business or your team?
How does it affect your relationship with you? And then, if the team are still on the previous value system, they will see you change and they will lose the respect for you. And maybe they will start saying, okay, I can't work for this company anymore because the boss has changed. He's sold out, or whatever phrase they would like to use. And maybe they won't leave, but they won't perform the way they did before, because that level of respect has gone, it's changed.
So how do you inform your team of the new values of your customer that don't align with your values?
Well, maybe you could just bring it up at a meeting and say, look, we've got this guy, they're providing 80% of our income at the moment. Their values have changed. They're not treating us with the respect that they used to do. What do you think we should do? Because that's respecting them, because they're affected. The negativity that customers introduced is affecting them, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. It will be affecting them. Now, if you're open about the situation and say, okay, if the decision is to get rid of him, it means we're all going to have to work harder. We're going to have to fill that void somehow. But the danger is, as I say, that customer could pull the plug at any time. So you're still going to have to fill that void. But if you've got the guys on board with you, they're more willing to.
Yeah, definitely. It's when you run a business, this is the kind of things that that come up. It's happening to us in this period at the moment. So
yeah, and it's that open communication and showing that respect to your team, which is paramount. It's more important than having the respect for the customer, because the customer won't support you necessarily, but the team is there to support you, and if you support them. And there have been cases where the team say, okay, well, I'm going to work for free for a month or two just to help you get out of the nonsense that you're in. Because they trust and they believe in you as an individual, because your values haven't been compromised.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Are there any questions? Anyone from the board, anyone wants to ask any questions or any reflections?
David had his hand up a few seconds ago. I don't know if he's still got a question.
Oh, go, David. I didn't see that. Sorry.
Yeah, several things you said make really good sense. And my thing is servant leadership versus bossism. And people who want to be bosses, as you mentioned earlier, politicians and stuff like that, they don't really care about other people's opinions, whereas servant leaders do. And I work with a lot of people from a lot of different places, and English is a very hard language for people with non-English to learn it, because
it's bad enough for English-speaking people to learn.
Yeah, because we don't apply gender to nouns, and most everybody else does. And so what I found is a lot of people with other cultures sometimes are afraid to say what they want to say because they're afraid of making a mistake.
Yep.
And so one of the things that I do is I use puns, and that usually catches people completely off guard. And I explain a pun is just another way of thinking. And then I explain how I understand our language is a difficult one to learn. So don't be afraid to make a mistake. Just say what you want to say and we'll work it out. And that puts people at ease, where you can start communicating with them very well. Do you find that too?
And, when you add to that the expectations, especially in Asia, that are put on the school children to not make mistakes, to get 150% in an exam, not 100%, 150%. Anything else is a failure. That really comes into play in that respect. And how we get them out of it is a challenge, because they will just stand there and they'll try and analyze every single word and then look for the perfect sentence, but they won't communicate because they don't have that ability. They're not taught to accept the mistakes. And mistakes are only an opportunity to grow anyway, aren't they?
Correct. And here in America, of course, our expectation is 20%, I think.
Maitri's got a question for you. She's got a hand up. Maitri?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be a part of this wonderful discussion. So my question is core value, I understood, but if you, sir, can give us a little bit idea about surface level values, like for an example.
Well, I mean, it's a value that we say we have, but we
Yeah.
don't really follow it in the way that we say we do. And honesty is one. I can be honest, but I can be dishonest at the same time. So, you know, I may not see that there's a problem in me taking a sweet, or let me put a better example, taking a pen from the office. To me, that's not dishonesty, but it's still stealing. And the same with photocopies, you know, in the days of photocopies, people would bring in all sorts of stuff to be photocopied and they didn't see anything wrong with it. But they're honest people. So they have that surface level honesty, but underneath there's some things they're dishonest about. And they don't recognize that necessarily, or they recognize it, they know about it, but they just don't think it's that important.
Yeah. Thank you so
And
much.
we're very good at justifying these things.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Paul, you got a question or something, a reflection on values?
No, it's been interesting to listen to what Stuart has to say. I just, it kept coming up for me that, you know, Carl Rogers in counseling, and you look at unconditional positive regard, you look at the golden rule of empathy, and congruency. It's just all sort of flows into your values and things all the time. So yeah, interesting chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. It's like having those conversations about values that you don't have. I too, with my team, we never sit down and talk about values, but it's so important to, you know, for them to see that we are together, our values, because we've been working together for over 5 years, so our values are intact. But when we come in contact with a customer like the one that we have now, that's pushing our values or making us compromise our values, I find it very stressful and, you know, sort of straining, like, you know, because of having to adapt to the whole situation and having to talk to the team and just say, this is what's happening. And what do we do? How do we get out of this? Do we compromise our values? Do we not pay our suppliers? Do we scrimp and save and cut and fire people? Not things that we don't want to do. I don't want to do. It's not, you know, it's what we've been together for such a long time. But then you've got the market and the companies pushing you in another direction. So it's a continual struggle, let's say, values and maintaining your values in business.
Yeah, I would suggest that values are always going to be challenged because that's part of our growth. How we can keep our values intact or improve upon them despite the external circumstances that happen. And, you know, if you have a value which proves to be not the best value, should you hang on to it or should you let it go?
I think values are at the end of the day, at the end of our journey, at the end of the situation, as you come out of the storm, is how you will be remembered.
Correct.
So how you are and how you behaved in that difficulty is how you will be seen. And so if we keep that always focused in mind as we go through our actions and our decision making, is it in line with how I want to be seen at the end? Because the situation, this storm will pass. And how will I be seen? How will I be spoken about, spoken of at the end? And if
Yeah,
that's
what's left of me at the end of the storm?
Exactly. How do you want to exactly to be at the end of the storm? I think so. That's your values. That's how I see values. So anyway, we're coming to the end. Like, let's wrap up. Anyone sort of like our takeaways? Joseph, you got a takeaway? What are you taking away from this 1 hour conversation with Stuart and the other participants?
Well, it's always a great pleasure to meet with Stuart. We've become great friends over the last probably 2 years anyway, and getting to know yourself, Gary. But I'm just reminded of a quote from Oscar Wilde, where he said that Britain and the United States were two countries divided by a common language. I think it fits very well with what we've been talking about here this morning.
Definitely, yeah. Philip, you got a takeaway from this hour spent together?
Well, it made me question a little bit about values and how I view myself and how I view my work and how I view my values there. So I think a lot of food for thought, and yeah, just very happy to have been here.
Yeah, yeah. Uni, you taking away something from this hour?
Well, yes. One is so grateful being here because, well, I learned so much from here that I can't actually say it in takeaway, because that's a lot of thing about business value and everything. So I learned so much. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stuart. Alessandro?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because, of course, as a coach, values is a very important aspect that we have to consider when you deal with people, because I see that people really conflict a lot with others and above all with themselves. Before, Stuart mentioned the word justifying, no justifications, and how people use justifications to sort of, trying to fit in values that are not being lived truly. And this is these mechanisms, these dynamics are very interesting for me. So there was a lot of good points that were brought up during this conversation and during this meeting, during this webinar. So I'm really thankful to you all, to you, Gary, and of course to Stuart. And it was very interesting, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maitri, you got a word to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, actually a lot. Value is a label, as Sir said, and we all know that non-aligned customers we are all dealing with, like we are putting our efforts, but we are not getting something back, like, and they're keep on doing continuation processes there. So putting energy will be a drain, obviously, that has to align with my value system. I'm going to add it. And obviously, I have learned about core values and surface value systems. So maximum, I think people are working more into surface value. So I will be taking care of giving emphasis in the core value system from my angle. So I need to work on, and a lot actually. And there is a contradiction about, obviously, many people I have seen that who are actually self-obsessed, but holding huge designations and claiming that they're having a strong value system. But later on realize that where the problem is. So need to understand that whether the person is saying honestly from his core value, or maybe obsession kind of, a lot to work actually. Thank you so much, Stuart, sir.
Yeah, there's a lot to it really is. Goodbye, Paul. James has just come into the room, but James, we're just closing up. We started at 10 o'clock.
Apologies. I thought it was 10 a.m. UK time, so which is 11 a.m. my time in South Africa. Great to be here. Apologies for coming in late.
Well, thank you for being here, but you've come right at the end. We're just closing up now, but hopefully you'll come next week. Anyway, if you look at the time, it's I think it's 0800 UTC, Universal Time Clock. So 0800 UTC is 10 o'clock in Italy. So the webinar is usually from 10 to 11. So feel free to drop in for next week if you can. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, everybody.
this topic was so interesting. We could talk about it. But I think values. My takeaway is that I need to speak about values more often. I don't talk about it enough, really. I think the team, we should all just sit down and say, look, these are our values, and this is what's happening outside, and it's not in line with us, but this is something that we have to deal with. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, and I think also we need to have that honest conversation with ourselves about what our real values are.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy.
Yeah.
Honest conversation with ourselves. So next week we're gonna have David Jones, and he's gonna be talking about metaverse branding. I don't know anything about that subject, but anyway, it's called his speciality is metaverse branding. So if you've got time, you're free, come along and let's listen to what he has to say about the metaverse. Okay, so have a great day. Thank you again, Stuart. Thanks,
Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a
See
good
you
day.
soon.
Thanks. Thanks a
Well,
lot.
for inviting me.
If you see the posts, do share them.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.